welcome to this webinar titled Using P5 with Cloud Storage and Cloud Infrastructure. My name is David Fox. Let me just check I'm sharing my screen, doing everything right. And with me, David Fox, I'm in the UK, just outside of London. And with me is Derek Brown. Hi, Derek.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Where are you, Derek? Somewhere warm.
I'm in the.
Where I am.
It is warm here. Actually, it's very warm. We're in Detroit area, which is we had snow and sleet less than a week ago, but it's 90 degrees today.
Excellent. Oh, it's a bit warmer there. Well, London's not bad actually. London's low 20s, but yeah. Anyway, moving on past the weather. So in this webinar, we are going to be talking about two different ways that you can hook P5 up to cloud storage. So the first one here, which would be our, whoops, just want to try to get a pointer up. So the first one there would be our way, basically hooking up P5 server that's running on premise. So like a P5 server that you might already have running, that might already be writing to on-premise storage like tape or disk. You can hook that up to a cloud bucket. So that's one from Amazon, S3, Backblaze B2, Azure, and various other storage, cloud storage vendors. Well, I've got a slide which lists them all in a sec. So we're going to look at doing that. And this basically is there to allow hardware-free infinite amount of storage at a cost, obviously, but a different kind of cost. It's not front-loaded like buying a big tape library. The cost is spread out over time. You start by just paying small amounts, but that keeps going. So this webinar is going to consist of quite a bit of live demo of me setting up the cloud storage. So we'll do that in a second. And then once we've done that, I'm going to show you how to deploy a P5 server running entirely in the cloud, in a virtual private cloud. In this case, we're going to be using Amazon Web Services, EC2, standing for Elastic Cloud Compute. So this is running P5 on a Linux machine, deployed from a marketplace. So there's a pre-built image that you can run up in Amazon Web Services. We'll deploy that, and then I'll show you various ways that you can hook that up to cloud storage, either from Amazon or somebody else, and how you can back up or archive on-premise storage using this resource in the cloud that you've created. So moving right along, many of you will already know that Archiware consists of these four different modules: P5 Backup, P5 Archive, Synchronize, and Backup to Go. So it's P5 Backup and P5 Archive, those two on the left-hand side, that write to pools and volumes which can be created on disk, tape, disk, or cloud, to go in the right order that they're shown there. So it's the cloud, oh, there's my pointer. So it's the cloud stuff that we're going to be looking at today. It is possible to use Synchronize a little bit with cloud. I'll talk maybe about that at the end. Backup to Go is entirely focused around using disk. So it's mostly P5 Backup and P5 Archive that we're interested in looking at today with using the cloud storage. So in P5 version 6, released earlier this year, we have support for all of these different cloud vendors. So there's a drop-down menu within the product when you're setting up cloud storage that has Amazon, S3, Snowball, and Glacier. So S3 is the kind of regular disk-based storage. Glacier is their cheaper archive storage. Snowball is a device which they'll send you in the ship to you in the mail, which has lots of disk storage in it. You put your archive data and ship it back to them. We support that workflow. We support Wasabi storage, which is an American vendor. There's a generic S3 support for various vendors that emulate the S3 protocol. We support Backblaze, Azure, and the most recent one we added was Google Cloud support. And within each of those different vendors, so up here I've got Amazon's Glacier storage selected. There may be various different storage classes within that vendor. So for example, Amazon have a deep archive product which works out at $1 per terabyte per month, which is the cheapest kind of cloud storage you can get from Amazon. So we support all of these different sub-storages within these vendors. And as of version 6, if you create what's called lifecycle rules, which mean that if you've got data sitting in the cloud for a month and it's not been accessed and you want to move it to a cheaper tier, we're able to figure out which tier it's moved to and follow that data, so that when you need to restore it, we'll be able to access it in the cheaper tier, pull it back to the more expensive tier, and then restore it from there. Additional thing that was introduced in version 6 is that we are now, as I mentioned earlier, in Amazon Web Services Marketplace. and we're going to use the marketplace image with Ubuntu Linux plus P5 in a few minutes to actually set up a P5 server in the cloud. So you'll see how to do that. It's very, very quick and very easy. So the first scenario that I'm going to show you is the one illustrated here. So we have, whoops, sorry about the slides jumping around. So we have an on-premise P5 server. So that's going to be on this Mac that you're looking at these slides being presented on. That's our on-premise server. And we're going to hook that up to some cloud storage, in this instance from Backblaze B2, and then we'll do some we'll archive some data to that storage. Obviously, the upload of that data is dependent upon the prevailing speed of the internet connection that we're sitting on. And in my case, I'm working from home. My upload speed is pretty poor, so I'm not going to archive too much data. But if you had a gigabit link, it's going to be a lot better. Once we've done that, we will be looking at actually deploying P5 into the cloud directly. But first of all, let's look at a local installation. So here I have in my browser a tab pointing to localhost on P5's admin port. This is an entirely fresh installation of P5 that I'm going to log into using the default password and username. And all I've done so far after installing this is added a license. So I haven't done any configuration in this P5 beyond adding a license. So the first thing we're going to do is jump to the Archive tab, down to Cloud Service here on the left, and there are two important buttons that we're going to use right now. The first one is to add a cloud service. So this is basically hook up to one of those providers that you saw in the drop down earlier. In this case, we're going to use Backblaze B2, and whichever one you pick, you'll be presented with the relevant credentials for hooking up that storage. So I have a text document here with some secret stuff in it, which I will delete after the webinar. So I'm quite happy to put that up there right now. And I'm just going to copy and paste effectively a username and a password for a Backblaze B2 account that previously exists, has a credit card attached to it and so on, so that I can use it. And within that B2 account, I already created this P5 training bucket. A bucket is like a big folder that exists in the cloud that is there for a particular use, and the names are normally globally unique, so they can be converted into URLs that allow you to access objects that you've placed in there. So the account credentials go in there. Parallel uploads can help if you've got lots of bandwidth available to you, but I don't, so I'm going to leave this on just one. So I apply those details, and then if I hit the test button and it comes back successfully, as it has done, then I know that my credentials are all correct and I'm going to be able to write data into that bucket. Okay, so there's my bucket set up. Next thing, I'm going to provide some cloud storage within P5 to archive to, and I do that by clicking on the Add Cloud Storage button here. First of all, I just need to tell this setup wizard which of the might have entered various different backup storage vendors. So I want to use the Backblaze B2, and Archiware uses a staging area or a cache on disk to first write the data before the data is copied up to the cloud or moved to the cloud. So I need to choose a directory off of my local disk in this instance. So I'm going to use this Samsung external disk, and I'll call it B2 cache, creating a new folder on there and selecting it. So there's my cache folder. And this checkbox here lets me choose whether or not I want to keep all the data that I'm going to be archiving both on that Samsung disk and in the cloud, or if I just want to keep my data in the cloud. So that's my preference, just to keep data in the cloud. And when I hit the apply button, P5 will create 100 terabytes worth of storage for me to use. Now, when I say create, it's not going to use 100 terabytes of storage, but it's going to make 100 terabytes available via a P5 pool for archive. If I need more, I can add more later, but initially there'll be 100 terabytes. And if I hit the monitor button, you'll see that there will be 100 volumes created by this setup wizard. So far, we've created about 40. And when that's finished, I'll be able to click into, well, I can already do that. I can click into my pool, which currently has 49 terabytes of available space, and there are 49 volumes within that pool. So there will be folders being created on the local storage for each of these 100 volumes that you see here. And as soon as we start archiving data onto those volumes, the data will get copied up to the cloud and the chunks of data will be removed locally so that we're not using a lot of local storage space. So in order to begin writing some data to that pool, I'm going to go into Archive Plan, create a new archive plan from scratch. I'll leave the name set to Untitled, so you can see our target storage is this Backblaze B2 archive pool that's just being created. Our index is the default archive index, and in order to have something to look at regards the data that we're going to archive, I'm just going to add previews for images so that we get little thumbnails of any JPEGs that we're archiving. So just adding that into the configuration and closing it. So if I go back to my job monitor, I imagine that we're just labeling the last of those 100 volumes at the moment. So what I can now do is go manually archive and choose from my desktop something to archive. So on the desktop, I have a folder called Ansil Nance Images. I'm going to add that to my archive selection, hit the archive button, and start the job. So if we watch this job running in the job monitor, we will first see the data being collected from the disk and written to volume number 1. So you see Backblaze B2 archive volume number 1. And as soon as we have a reasonable amount of data in there, we will start uploading part of that volume up to the Backblaze bucket. So you can see here it says copying chunks, and the actual amount of data that's been saved from archiving this folder is about 10 megabytes. So you can see how slow my broadband is, copying 132 kilobytes a second up to that Backblaze B2 bucket. So this is now copying up to the cloud. And if we go look inside our Backblaze B2 bucket, so this window here is a little tool called Transmit, an application for the Mac that lets me actually browse that Backblaze P5 training bucket. So if I refresh this window, previously that was empty, but you can see the first of the volumes that we're writing to, labeled 10,001, is already showing up as a folder inside a Backblaze. And inside that folder, under a directory structure that's controlled by P5, that 10 megabytes of data plus anything additional will be copied and then removed locally. So you can see now that the archive job was just generating thumbnails, and now it's complete. So that means that if I'm now interested in restoring some of the data that I've just archived up to the cloud, I can go browse my archive index and see the folder structure that I've archived data from within. So on my desktop, there was that images folder. Within that, there's various other folders. And then you can see there were JPEGs in the folders that we archived. The archive date is today. And if I double click on one of these objects that we've archived, we will see both the thumbnail, and we will also see that this file was archived to this Backblaze volume 10,001. So the data that comprises that JPEG image is sitting in that Backblaze bucket within this folder called that represents that particular volume. And if I look at that volume in the volume list within P5, then you'll see volume number 1 now has 10.75 megabytes of data on it. So that's, in a nutshell, how to add some storage to P5 in the cloud, and then very quickly making an archive plan just to illustrate how that storage pool can be used. I should say at this point actually that we'll take questions at the end of this presentation. So whilst you're watching, if anything's occurring to you that we're maybe not covering in enough detail, just go to the questions panel within the GoToWebinar interface and type something in there, and I'll run through them all at the end. Okay, so that's this scenario from is it that scenario or is it the first one? Let me just check which slide I'm on. Yeah, so scenario 1, that's the on-premise P5 server. So that's the P5 server that we have installed locally on this Mac, writing data up to this bucket up in the cloud. So the next scenario is where we install P5 in the cloud directly and then attach it to some cloud storage. So to do that, I'm going to jump to this EC2 console window. So this is an account in Amazon EC2, where currently I have an instance that I was testing with earlier, but no running instances. So from here, if I click on Launch Instance, I can fire up a machine in the cloud. And I'm going to jump to the AWS Marketplace here and search for P5 or Archiware, either will find us, and you will see that there is a Archiware P5 Backup and Archive free trial, bring your own license edition. So I will choose that one. And it tells me that the software costs are 0 because you're bringing your own license. So you can either use an evaluation license or a purchase license. The EC2 costs are based on the size of machine that you want to run and how much memory and CPU power it's got and so on. And the next step allows us to pick a machine. So let's go for this small instance here with 1 CPU and 2 gigabytes of memory. And if I just click on Review and Launch now, I'll get a summary of what's about to happen. So I have some storage configured by the image, which gives me a 20 gigabyte cache storage and an 8 gigabyte system partition from which the operating system will run. So I'm happy with all of that. I'll click the launch button, acknowledge that I know where to find a key pair, which is what I'll need to use if I want to make an SSH connection, this being an Ubuntu Linux operating system. And then what happens is the instance gets launched. Amazon finds some hardware to run a little Ubuntu instance on. And if we go down to view instances here, you'll see a second entry in my list of running machines. And this one here is pending. So that means it's in the process of starting up. Now there's two things that you need to know initially in order to start using this Linux machine as a P5 server. The first is the public DNS information, which we have here, and we can click to copy to clipboard. So either the public IP or this DNS name here will allow us in a web browser to get to the web interface for P5. So if I create a new tab in my browser here and paste in, the IP, the DNS name for that instance, followed by :8000, which is the port number that we run on, and login for the login page, and hit return. So initially the machine takes a little while to start up. So if we go back here and refresh our window. Now, once the machine starts up, I'll go refresh this tab. The other thing that we need in order to log in is this instance ID number here. This will be the default password in order to log in as the admin user into our P5 server running in the cloud. So let's just copy that one. So we have that ready, and just do a refresh on this window. And you see that we get a P5 login screen coming up where the username, the default, is admin. And the password, the default, is that EC2 instance ID that we just copied. So if we click login now, it reminds us that we might want to change that, that default password, and we'll get our initial unlicensed copy of P5 showing its web interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the password from that instance ID default, which I can still paste in. I'll change that to password, something I can easily remember, and the password change was successful. That's great. So the next thing I want to do is enter a license so that we can start to do some configuration here. So I'm going to manually add an evaluation license, which will be this one here. So we will use a channel eval key. This one expires on July the 1st, and this is the checksum to activate it. So now you can see all of the icons within the UI are colored in, and we can close that window. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is add some Amazon S3 storage so that we can do a backup to S3 storage. Obviously, the S3 storage and the Linux instance are both running inside of Amazon's cloud, so the speed between the Linux instance and the storage it's writing to should be pretty quick. So let's click on Cloud Service. And just as before, this is where I previously added that Backblaze storage. This time I'm going to add some Amazon S3 storage, and I will copy my key and my secret ID, and the bucket name is P5 Cloud Webinar, And for this, I'm just going to use standard S3 storage. There's various intelligence tiering that will move the data to cheaper storage depending on how frequently it's accessed. So there's my credentials. And again, I'll test that connection to make sure that it successfully connects, which it does. Again, here I could maybe benefit if I was going to back up a lot of data by having more than one upload stream. So my S3 cloud service shows up here. And now, just as before, we will add 100 terabytes of cloud storage via volumes and a pool. The place where this is going to reside will be within this Linux machine that gets deployed in the marketplace. There is a separate disk attached called P5 data specifically for housing the cloud cache volumes. So we will choose that one. And we will not keep a local copy so that we get 100 terabytes of storage created. And again, just as with my local P5 installation, that will schedule a job which we can monitor, which will create 1 terabyte volumes and give us 100 terabytes worth of cloud storage for our backups in this particular instance. So you'll see that we're labeling volumes in a pool that's going to be called Amazon S3 Backup. And it's actually going a bit quicker than it did on the Mac, I think, on this Windows box. So again, if I go back to the UI here, if I look at the pools, I can see there's the pool that's being created for the purpose of backup in this case, because we did it via the backup tab. And currently we've got 57 volumes providing 57 terabytes, but that's running. And if I refresh it, that figure will go up. So what I'm going to show you now is how we might back up an on-premise machine, on-premise data, up to this cloud instance of P5 with its attached 100 terabytes of storage. So to do that, I'm going to use that P5 installation back on this local Mac. So what I'm going to do is say that this machine in my home, which has some storage on that I want to back up, I would like to connect this up to that cloud server that we've just deployed in Amazon Web Services. So to do that, in fact, to illustrate exactly how you would do that, I'm going to remove the license key because I don't need this machine running at my home to have a P5 license sitting on it. And I will log out and back in again with the default credentials. So now we have an unlicensed copy of P5. So I want to connect this up to that P5 cloud instance, and I do that by going to Agent Setup over here in this menu that's available even without a license installed, and I can configure a connection to a remote P5 server. So let's do that. And basically to do this, I need to know that DNS name of that remote cloud server. So I can go back here and I can again copy the EC2 DNS name and paste that in here. And I just need the username, which is admin, and I change the password to password on that cloud copy of P5. And yes, I want to allow a reverse connection. So what this means is that the server in the cloud, the P5 server in the cloud, can run a backup whenever it wants of this remote machine, and without having to do any firewall configuration on my home or an office where this machine is located, we will be able to access data on that remote client machine. And it does that because the remote client machine keeps a connection to the P5 server open all the time. So there's always an open connection for us to go back down and retrieve data. So allow reverse connection, yes, apply that. And then I just click on the register button to ensure that we can get a successful registration up to that P5 backup server. And that's great. So we can close that. That part of the configuration of my on-premise server is now done. Now there's one bit of information I need, which is the host ID of this P5 installation, which is displayed in the About window. So this is like a unique identifier for this particular P5 installation. So now I go back to my P5 server in the cloud. So we're now in the web browser in this tab looking at this cloud deployment of P5. And under clients, I will add my remote Mac. So I'll call it remote Mac. And for the address, I'm going to use the host ID. And then for the credentials, I didn't change the default admin password. Let me just retype that. So I will apply that. and that will basically hook up the server back to that remote P5 installation running at my home. And it'll come back without any errors. But at this point, if I wanted to enable compression and encryption over that data traveling over that internet connection, then I could do that. And now I have my remote Mac sitting in the client list. So that's now a machine that I can access data on and back up if I want to. So let's just very quickly make a backup plan. And excuse my animals making noises. So we'll have a backup plan called Untitled. Don't need to worry about the name. And the directories that we want to back up will be a directory off of this remote machine. So I'll click on New to create a new backup task. It's the remote Mac that I'm interested in. And what we'll do is we'll back up a folder that's sitting on this external drive here. So I will browse this remote machine. So this window will allow me to live browse storage attached to this remote Mac. And you can see my Samsung T5 disk showing up on the left-hand side. And then there's a folder in there, an images folder, that I'm going to select and add to my backup plan. And then I'll apply that. So that's the one folder that this backup will back up. And all that needs to be done now is just to create a backup event so that I'm regularly backing up that folder. So I want to do daily incrementals at 10:30. That's fine. And it's going to write to that Amazon S3 backup pool that we already have configured. So I can apply that. And now if I want to just run that to make sure that it works, I'll highlight the incremental event and the remote machine, hit the Start Now button, and now our job monitor window will show a backup job running where it will connect to the remote machine, and we will see data leaving the Mac on its way up to the P5 server in the cloud. That folder is only about 10 megabytes. I'm sticking with small folders here because my internet bandwidth is not very quick, but in a moment we'll see the data being written and the volume being copied to the S3 bucket so that the backup of my Mac Samsung T5 folder will reside on the first volume inside of that S3 bucket. So you can see the job's now writing data to the local cache folder, and when it's done some of that, it'll start uploading to the cloud bucket, the S3 bucket. So that job's finishing, so we should see that copying the data up to the cloud. And if I look again in my transmit application at my S3 bucket and refresh this window, we should be able to see that volume number 1, again, that's the first of the backup volumes, now exists in the cloud. And yeah, you can see the 11.7 megabytes of data actually now being copied up by the job into the cloud bucket, which didn't take very long because it's going between the P5 server and the S3 storage, which is all running in S3. So I could then maybe make a change to that folder and run another incremental backup, and it will just save the changes that I've made to the folder. So hopefully you get the idea that there's two different ways that you can deploy P5. Just to go back to the slides to illustrate. So the first way was running P5 on premise on my Mac and connecting to a remote piece of cloud storage. And the second way that we just showed you was running P5 within the cloud. And actually this slide illustrates that my Mac was down here in a commercial location, let's say, along with various other machines and maybe various different locations. And I can have a shared cloud server with storage attached running in the cloud that can back up all of these different hosts at all of these different locations to a central place. As well as that, this slide here is showing us that whilst you've got P5 running in Amazon's cloud using Amazon storage, you can still connect to another vendor's storage. So you can have Amazon running in Amazon Web Services. You can have P5 running in Amazon Web Services, rather, connecting to an Azure bucket over on the right-hand side, or a Backblaze bucket, or many different storage vendors' storage at the same time. So you could have backups that are going to different storage vendors so that you're not relying on a single vendor and a single point of failure. Derek, I was going to ask you a little bit about how you see this being useful for customers in more of a kind of solutions way rather than a technical way. So do you want to say a little bit to that? Sorry, I was going to let you speak a bit earlier, but
Sure.
I got carried away.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, you did a great job. This is very clear. Yeah, basically, why back up to the cloud, right? With P5, when we, traditionally for the last 20 years, you have an on-site server, you back it up to on-site storage. But if you had multiple locations, there was no good way to share, archived and backed up data between those locations. There's no shared index. So Archiware did release the LTFS Exchange toolkit so that you could actually restore things to a tape using LTFS and send it to another location. But that can also be costly and take more time. So not only would you have multiple locations, if you have the P5 running in the cloud, now each location has a client like you just showed here, so you can back up the clients from anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the world, to this one installation. But then you can restore to any client anywhere in the world, and all those locations now can browse the one index, the entire archive for the entire company or companies, and be able to have that whole remote workflow. Due to the COVID-19 experience that we're all suffering through right now, we've also realized that a lot of people now are working from home, and so it's not just multiple locations of the businesses, but now working at your house, you could add a client to your workstation and then be able to pull down assets, restore them to your local machine for editing and whatever use. So it makes a lot more sense. The other advantage to it, to some companies, is OpEx versus CapEx, and that's basically saying there's no really or low upfront costs. You're not going to have to buy the server and buy hardware on site and buy storage. You're not going to have on-site installation services, maybe only some remote services from your reseller. So the low upfront cost, and then you just pay monthly, more attuned to using it, how much you use it. So lots of use would be more expensive, but so you don't only have that non-centralized location, but now you also have a monthly budget for your backup and archive workflows. And it's also extra safe. You've got all this data as been strewn across in these data centers like EC2, and then even if they have disasters in certain locations, their co-locations will have your data safe. So it's extremely safe using this kind of offsite workflow. So it's really exciting to see everything move kind of this direction. And it's also important to note that we don't have to use EC2. We've got an EC2 instance. It's very easy to set up here. As you saw, David just had to search their marketplace. But you could use other things out there as well. I know there's like compute partners with different cloud storages. For instance, Packet works with B2 and Wasabi. And they allow free egress through Packet, which is a kind of like a bare metal rental cloud server. So there's other options out there in addition to this, but it's kind of the way everything's working now, and kind of the direction everyone's going. So
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I really like the point actually that you
sure.
can. I just pulled up the restore window here because just to make the point that as illustrated in the slide, if we backed up some data from this client down here, this guy over here could still browse the web interface of the cloud server and pull stuff back to him. So what I did here was just chose to restore this images folder that we backed up. And at the point that you restore, you can choose from all of the remote clients that you've got configured which one you want to restore to. So of course there's only one configured here because I only set one up while you were watching. But if I was to set up Derek's Mac in this list, and we did the same thing with Derek's Mac, then, or PC, other operating systems are available, then we could restore data directly back to Derek's machine that I've just backed up from my machine here in London. So then things start to get interesting. Okay, so yeah, we're running 35 minutes in now, so that's the end of the content that we wanted to show you. Just a final slide to say that you can always grab a 5 or 30-day trial evaluation license from Archiware's website. Click on the blue link, plus downloading the latest version of the software. Okay, thanks for attending, everybody.
Right.
Hope you found the content useful. Thanks, Derek, and see you.
Thank you, David. Great job.
Cheers.